After that dashing start, more Google in the form of Joseph Smarr, senior staff software engineer. Machine learning about people. I mean, essentially, Joe, what we're talking about here is how searching is being transformed, right?
Yeah, I think in a very general sense, right? That the world just confronts us every day with these sort of overwhelming choices about all of the possible things we could read or watch, or all of the people we could meet, all of the places we could go, even just finding a particular photo that you took recently. And so just sort of making the human go through all the choices doesn't really work anymore. And offering sort of one-size-fits-all recommendations, one-size-fits-all ends up not fitting anyone particularly well. And so how do you end up kind of giving people a good way of helping make those choices? And you tend to need to know enough about them to offer something that, just like I would make you a recommendation that suits your personal taste. And increasingly, the way to do that is with machine learning, because it's rather than sort of writing down specific rules about, this is what restaurants, I do and don't like, you can kind of infer it from past behavior. So if I tell you a bunch of restaurants that I didn't enjoy, maybe the algorithms can figure out what type of food or ambiance or whatever seems to suit my taste.
So in the simple, like at the crude parallel of music, which we still already have, right? You like this song, you'll really like that one. You can devise algorithms, you are devising algorithms that will do the same for people, music, I don't know. I mean, I come to a fire conference, I've obviously got this, but you could help me find the 4 guys I really, really want to talk to out of everyone else.
Well, exactly, yeah, we touched on this briefly yesterday, but I mean, I was just thinking, everyone here has such a distinguished background. It's kind of a shame that we've had to boil it down into 1 paragraph per person, and it's the same 1 paragraph that everybody sees, regardless of are you in the same industry, how much background you share. So I do think it would be cool if you could upload everyone's sort of full bio and then give each person a sort of personalized snapshot of here's the angle on each person of why you might want to talk to them, what you might want to talk about, especially because most of us are probably looking up the latest agenda on our smartphones anyway, so there's an opportunity to do that personalization on the fly.
And when we're talking about the software here, we're talking about pattern recognition again.
Exactly, right. I mean, machine learning is nothing but pattern recognition.
Yeah.
Right? And so you need some examples to build the pattern on top of.
How far are you along this path?
Well, I mean, I think there's amazing progress right now. It's such an exciting time, and not just at Google, but in the industry in general, because as we just said, you need the data. So, in the past, if you wanted to recommend a book to me, it might be pretty hard for me to tell you all the books I've read and which ones I liked, because I was just, leafing through the paper, right? And now it's much easier on my Kindle or something like that to actually have the substrate on which to make those pattern recognition choices. So obviously with smartphones and the project I work on at Google Stories, I have this problem, I'm sure you guys all have, where you go on vacation, you take a zillion photos, and you never get around to actually curating them. And one of the reasons it's hard is that, you need to be able to figure out, well, were these photos taken at the same place, or was that, did I go to dinner then? And so having my phone that I'm already, it's already helping me figure out where I went for maps and navigation and so forth, that becomes a much better set of signals than just the photos themselves to help piece together what I did where and give me a useful summary. So it's you sort of have to have the data to work with, and now we actually have a lot, which is really nice.
Okay, perhaps a rather dumb question, but Google would curate my sentiment based on my past behavior, right? Rather than me kind of liking in some active kind of Facebook way, I would tick. I mean, is that how it works, or is there something else? Is there some kind of opt-in potential here where I could actually help to curate my own tastes through search terms?
Different systems vary from sort of do what I say to do what I mean, or from watch my behavior versus let me tell you specifically what I'm interested in. And a lot of systems end up being sort of a hybrid of the two. So I think a lot of these personalization systems tend to look at your past behavior and try to infer what sort of things you're into, but then you can go in and tweak them. So a good example is the new Foursquare app, which helps recommend you places to go. They've got this model where just based on the places you've gone in the past, they start to sort of suggest things, but then you can actually specifically go in and say, I like sushi, I don't like whatever, and then so you still, as a human, feel like you have a chance to curate it. Because sometimes your past behavior can be misleading, right? There's all these sort of classic examples of like you're shopping for a gift for somebody else. It doesn't necessarily mean it should be part of your own personal taste profile or things like that. So I always think it's useful to be able to go in and help tweak the machine so that the human and the machine are collaborating together.
Yeah, you're right. You make an interesting point that you can sometimes search for something and suddenly you just get the same thing a gazillion times, right?
Right.
Is that, how do you modify that as a user?
Well, I think it's just that when you're designing these systems, you want to design them in such a way where the user has a mental model of what sort of inferences you've made as a system, and then they can go in and tweak them. So in the case of stories, we'll say, here's what we think were the best photos that you took and the places you went, but it's just sort of privately for you. And each one of them you can say, no, I don't like that photo, I'd rather have this one, or no, this section was irrelevant, or we think you were at this restaurant, no, I was actually across the street. And so every time we make a guess, you can correct it, and then of course that helps the system get smarter over time, but it also means you as the user never feel like you're penned in by a bad guess.
Again, any questions, guys? Please stand up and get yourself to a mic. So privacy, I suppose I have to chuck this one in. I mean, there's always concerns. Every evolution is dogged by the anxiety of some. I mean, are you sensing kind of pushback on some of this?
I guess the way I think about it is always, as a user, what am I trying to get done, and what information do I feel it's useful to provide in order to get that value back, right? So when I think about, if you just sort of said abstractly, do you want a system to have access to the places you went, you might think, I don't know, that maybe makes me nervous. But you say, do you want to be able to search for, show me those photos I took in Deer Valley? Suddenly you think, oh yeah, that would be useful. And so I think as long as the systems are letting the users make those choices based on what they're actually getting and what they're giving, then I think people are pretty good at making those choices. And so the responsibility of the systems is obviously just to make those a clear choice to the user and give them control. So.
But I suppose also that those parameters are withheld from, I don't know, corporate actors, advertisers, guys who are going to kind of weigh in. I have a desperate desire to lose weight, and suddenly I'm being fired sort of shots of lovely cakes because they know that I'm vulnerable and I'm extremely hungry at the moment. I mean, all of that stuff. Is that access to this kind of information, because obviously you are building up massive piles of data on individual users around the world. I mean, there is a risk there, right?
Well, I mean, again, I think each user has a great opportunity to go in and say, where is it that personalization is useful, where is it that it's not, and what data are you basing it on? And actually, everybody wins. Like if you're getting, back to the example of, you were just shopping for a gift for a friend and suddenly you're getting advertisements for that, that's not good for the user, but it's also not good for the advertiser, right? So actually everybody does win when you get a chance to get in there and fine tune how things are working. And so I think actually the incentives are pretty well aligned. It's just a matter of, making software that is complicated enough for the complicated world we live in, but simple enough that users really feel like they can make an intuitive set of choices is, it's always a challenge, but it's the business that we're in. Yeah,
and but following, Corey's observations, you're obviously endorsing total freedom here.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's as a product designer, you always want to try to keep things as simple as possible, but not so simple that users get frustrated that they don't have the level of control they want. So I mean, there's no way to solve that in the general sense, but it's something that I think as an industry we've made a lot of progress on, and we obviously keep working on.
Corey's back.
Well, I wanted to observe that historically relying on implicit cues from users goes through a curve where if you go back in time and look at a user behavior that had no other significance, like I'm just going to dinner, as opposed to I'm training an machine learning set, you get really good outcomes. But after it becomes an explicit task, it turns out that like in a kind of game theoretical way, it's super gameable, right? And the ultimate example of this is PageRank. When a link between two pages only means I link to this page, there's, it works great to figure out the latent structure of the internet. And as soon as you say, oh, well, we will make your page the top link if it has lots of inbound links, the entire thing goes to hell. My wife used to work for BBC Creative Research and Development, and she always said, any number we put on the wall goes up, right? And it's trivial to do, and people will do it, and machine learning will do it, and people are often in an adversarial relationship with machine learning, because although I want the best possible recommendations for me, I also want you to get recommended the thing I'm selling.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and it's very true that implicit behavior, just sort of watching what the person actually does, is often a lot more accurate than what they say. So a classic example of this is Facebook and Google Plus and others have found that if you rank content to people based on the things they put on their profile explicitly, like here are the bands I'm into, here are the things I'm into, that's a much more curated list that people are thinking about, what am I signaling? It turns out not to be as accurate, and if you actually measure what do people consume and like to click, versus if you look at the articles that they've actually read or clicked on in the past. So that it's sort of this, if you make it explicit, then you add this sort of interesting bias to it. But there are other times where it's useful because sometimes the system is giving you want to see more recommendations in a certain area, and so being able to go in and say, no, let me tweak it. I mean, usually I think people aren't trying to game themselves so much. When these things are trying to help me be more productive and smarter, I don't have the same incentive to game it versus in one of those environments like you talked about.
One more question.
Yeah, Joseph, I've got a question. I'm interested in this interplay between the AI, who's my counterpart, to me, he or she is a being, and if it's going to be a partnership, there's going to be some communication. So far, our communication to monitoring and forming that pattern has been a thumbs up on Pandora, or a click on a YouTube video on Facebook and it shows you the next 3. And it's very, very low, the input to say what I'm interested in, give my expert opinion to the pattern recognizer is not very insightful. Can you kind of lay out for us some of the categories that you're looking at? Like category, you guys are doing some cool stuff with the story, and as we've been talking, and so can you lay out for us some of the categories of places where you're taking the expert opinion of the user that you're actually ultimately trying to serve?
Yeah, well, I really like the way you formulated that, because for those of us who actually do have a real human personal assistant, I'm not fortunate enough to be one of them, but I have observed this. There is a very rich interplay back and forth, right? And you give a lot of very subtle feedback, and you do both work so that your personal assistant is trying to be proactive, but also trying to be very aware of the limits of their ability to infer what you're going to actually want, and know when to ask your opinion, when to bug you, when to sort of say, I'm going to set the defaults, but you can change it if you want, and when to just go ahead and do it, right? And so I think that that's the right model. I sort of, what inspires me is the idea that technology can empower everyone to have those same superpowers that today only a very few of us have. And so that's, I think, a perfect example where we all kind of want to have that personal assistant, and we want to find ways to have a richer dialogue back and forth with them. And this goes across, it goes across every aspect of your life. So I don't even know if I can give you just a few count of categories, but just think about all the tasks that you sort of have to accomplish in the world, and think, if I had my trusted assistant with me, what are ways that they might be able to help me, be smarter, be happier, spend more time the way I want to spend it, and so forth.
I'm reminded of the rule of screenwriting, that you're always supposed to be giving the viewer what they want, but not what they expect at the end of the movie. Maybe that's essentially what Google is trying to do.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, which are we optimizing for the expected value or the wanted value?
Give them a little pleasant surprise with the delivery of the
certainly building the stories product, we tried to take a lot of cues from real storytellers and real screenwriters. What is it that gives a narrative structure? And so, when you have a set of photos and it's just one after the other, it becomes sort of hard to follow along. You kind of lose the plot. And so trying to separate it out into chapters, have a clear beginning, middle, and end, and let a person kind of come along and figure out how much weight to put on each thing. This is something where there is actually a lot of sophistication outside of the world of technology that I think we can increasingly learn from. I think it's a good analogy.
Okay, I think we're done. We're pretty well, was that a minute till our time is up. Thank you very much indeed. My thanks, Joe.
Yes, thank you very much.